People laughed when a dusty old pickup rolled onto the tarmac, and a grease-stained mechanic named Clayton Reese stepped out. He was called to fix a billionaire's private jet, but no one expected him to touch it, let alone repair it. As executives mocked him from behind glass, one woman watched in silence, Delaney Carter, the jet's stunning owner. Within minutes, she would walk onto the runway, stop everything, and ask the one question that would shock the entire world. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. People laughed when a dusty old pickup rolled onto the tarmac, and a grease-stained mechanic named Clayton Reese stepped out. He was called to fix a billionaire's private jet, but no one expected him to touch it, let alone repair it. As executives mocked him from behind glass, one woman watched in silence, Delaney Carter, the jet's stunning owner. Within minutes, she would walk onto the runway, stop everything, and ask the one question that would shock the entire world. It was 6:47 a.m. when Clayton arrived at Clearwater International Airport. The sky was still bruised from dawn, and the wind bit through his worn-out flannel. His boots crunched against the tarmac, every step echoing louder than the distant roar of engines. He had received the emergency call just before sunrise. Jet failure, urgent. No details, no context, only an address and the promise of quick pay. The private jet stood like a silver beast in the distance, surrounded by polished men in navy suits, glossy shoes, and designer coats. They glanced up briefly when Clayton approached, then returned to their laughter. One leaned over to another and whispered something, and both burst into a chuckle. Clayton ignored them. He had seen their type before, boardroom brilliance with zero understanding of machines. What mattered was the aircraft. Lives were on the line. He dropped his tools beside the jet, opened the engine panel, and froze. What he saw nearly made his breath hitch. The fuel line was cracked. Not just cracked, melted. The insulation was gone. The clamp was corroded. And a fuel leak was dangerously close to the ignition coil. Whoever had touched this last should have been banned from aviation. One spark, and this jet would have exploded midair. Clayton knew he had minutes, not hours. With no backup, no assistant, and no time to explain, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. His fingers moved with the certainty of years spent fixing engines in barns, on highways, and under the scorching sun of Carolina summers. The airport staff gawked. A few recorded videos on their phones. He could feel their judgment like heat on his back, but he did not stop. Inside the terminal, Delaney Carter watched everything. She said nothing as her staff snickered. She was not just a CEO. She was aviation royalty. Her father had built Carter Skytech from scratch, and she had turned it into an empire. She knew jets. She had flown them, built them, raced them, and what she saw outside stunned her. She leaned forward, squinting through the glass. Who was this man with the oil-slicked hands and torn jeans, who seemed to move with the grace of a surgeon? Why was he the only one who saw what her trained pilots had missed? Then the jet's lights flickered. A soft hum pulsed through the machine, like a heartbeat. It was alive again. Her breath caught. She stood up slowly, eyes still locked on the man outside. Everyone else saw a mechanic. She saw something else entirely. And in less than 3 minutes, she would walk down that runway and change both their lives forever. The moment the jet roared back to life, the laughter stopped. The executives behind the glass stared in stunned silence, their smug grins evaporating as the humming grew steadier. One of them whispered, "That should have taken hours." But Clayton had already closed the engine panel. He did not celebrate. He did not gloat. He wiped his hands on an old rag, slung his tool bag over his shoulder, and turned to walk away. That was when the private jet's door opened. The steps lowered slowly, each click echoing like thunder across the silent tarmac. A pair of heels touched the metal steps, sleek, black, commanding. Delaney Carter descended with the elegance of someone born into power. But there was something different in her eyes. This was not the gaze of a woman used to getting what she wanted. This was curiosity, sharp, intentional, unshakable. Clayton stopped mid-step when he saw her coming toward him. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit with gold buttons, her hair tied back, her stride confident. Every step she took made the suited men behind her shift uncomfortably. She walked right past them, past the silent engineers, past the staff who had been laughing just minutes ago. She walked straight up to the man covered in engine grease, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "You fixed it," she said quietly. Clayton blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "No, you saved it. My pilot told me the engine was compromised beyond repair. He said we would need to ground it for a week. He missed a melted fuel line. It was nearly touching the ignition coil," Clayton said calmly, brushing dust off his shirt. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in realization. "You could have walked away." "I don't walk away from fire hazards." A beat of silence. Then Delaney smiled. Not the kind of smile worn in boardrooms, but one that came from somewhere real. It was small, honest, and it startled everyone watching. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. "Yes." "Delaney Carter. Carter Skytech." "You don't seem impressed." "I'm not here to be impressed. I'm here to fix problems." Delaney studied him, then turned to her staff. "Everyone inside. Now." No one dared object. The terminal doors clicked shut behind them. Now it was just the two of them on the tarmac. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by men who talk big and do little," she said, her voice softer now. "You're the first one who did the opposite." Clayton gave a small nod. "I was just doing my job." Delaney took a deep breath, as if making a decision that would alter everything. She looked at the sky, then back at the man who had saved her jet and possibly her life. She took a step closer. "What would you do," she asked slowly, "if someone like me asked you something completely insane?" Clayton did not move. "That depends." "How insane?" "What if I asked you to marry me?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind whispered across the runway. A bird took off from a nearby pole. And Clayton, still in torn jeans, boots stained with fuel, and fingers blackened with grease, looked at the billionaire CEO with the calm of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Clayton did not laugh. He did not flinch. He simply stood there, his eyes locked on hers, as if trying to decode the question behind the question. Most men would have stumbled over their words, tried to play it cool, or assumed it was a joke. But not Clayton. He had spent too many years fixing what others gave up on. He knew the difference between noise and meaning, and this was not noise. Delaney waited. Her expression was unreadable, but her breath was unsteady, as if the words had shocked even her. She was not a woman used to waiting, but she stood still, hoping the man in front of her would not treat this like a punchline. Clayton wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "You don't even know me. That's why I'm asking." He raised an eyebrow. "Come again?" Delaney stepped forward, her heels clicking on the concrete like a countdown. "I have been proposed to 23 times, I counted, by men in suits who memorized my net worth and called it love. But you," she paused, her voice catching, "you walked into this nightmare with a wrench, saved my jet, risked your life, and asked for nothing in return." "I didn't do it for you," Clayton said. "I did it because someone had to." "Exactly," she whispered. "That's what makes it real." He looked down, suddenly aware of the dirt on his hands, the fraying collar of his shirt. "You want to marry a mechanic?" "No. I want to marry the only man here who didn't try to impress me." Behind them, the lights from the terminal glowed in the evening dusk. A few curious eyes peeked through the glass, whispers spreading like wildfire. Phones were likely filming, but Delaney didn't care. For the first time in years, she was not performing. She was simply being. Clayton finally broke the silence. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack." He studied her for a moment. "Not the clothes, not the title, but the person." "Then, take off your heels." Delaney blinked. "What?" "If you're serious, take off your shoes. Come walk with me. 5 minutes." No titles, no headlines, just two people on the same ground. She hesitated only a second. Then she leaned on one foot, kicked off one heel, then the other. Barefoot on hot concrete, Delaney Carter followed a mechanic into the sunset. They walked past the jet, past the shadows of silent staff. She didn't ask where they were going. She only matched his pace, step for step. Clayton led her to the edge of the airfield, where old hangars stood like forgotten giants. He pulled open a rusted door and gestured for her to enter. Inside was not what she expected. There were no machines, no engines, just a small folding table, a battered chair, and walls lined with old photographs, planes, mechanics, and one little boy in overalls standing beside a man who looked just like Clayton, only older and smiling wide. "My father built his life fixing engines," Clayton said quietly. "I watched him fix planes that others said were too far gone. When he died, I inherited this hangar. I kept the lights off because dreams don't run on electricity. They run on grit." Delaney turned slowly, taking it all in. "Every man you've met wanted your empire," Clayton continued. "I don't care about that. But if you're really offering something real, then don't expect champagne and fireworks. Expect scraped knuckles, midnight repairs, and meals on toolboxes." Delaney smiled slowly. "That sounds perfect." For the first time, Clayton smiled back. Not because he was charmed, but because he believed her. Outside, the wind had picked up, but inside the hangar, everything felt still. The following morning, sunlight poured through the stained glass of the old hangar like liquid gold. Delaney sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, wearing Clayton's oversized flannel shirt and sipping coffee from a chipped mug. Her designer dress lay folded beside her, almost forgotten. In that moment, she looked nothing like a billionaire, just a woman who had finally exhaled. Clayton, sitting across from her with a wrench in hand, spoke without looking up. "You really stayed." "I said I would." Most people would have called a driver, found the nearest five-star suite. "I already know what 5 stars feel like," Delaney said, then added with a quiet smile, "I wanted to see what 5 a.m. with you felt like." Clayton chuckled softly. "It's loud. It smells like grease, and it starts with black coffee and cold feet." She raised her mug in a mock toast. To cold feet, then. But outside the hangar, the world had not paused. News was spreading, a billionaire missing, her jet grounded, security footage leaked, her name trending. But no one knew where she was, not even her inner circle. What made it more wild was the rumor: someone had seen her barefoot, walking across a tarmac with a man in oil-stained jeans. Back at the Carter Aviation boardroom, chaos reigned. Jason Pennington, chief operating officer and Delaney's longtime advisor, stood red-faced at the head of the table. "This is unacceptable. We have journalists outside, shareholders panicking, and the board calling emergency meetings." A younger executive leaned in. "Sir, what if she's choosing love?" Jason scoffed. "She's a Carter. Carters don't chase love. They build legacies." But one person at that table, Delaney's godmother, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, said nothing. She had seen Delaney grow up in castles and cry alone in them. She remembered birthdays missed, laughter faked, and smiles rehearsed. And now, for the first time in years, Delaney was off script. Evelyn sipped her tea slowly, hiding a rare smile. Back at the airfield, Clayton and Delaney worked together on an old Cessna he had been restoring for years. Not a word about companies or headlines, only grease, banter, and stolen glances. Delaney's hands, once used for corporate signatures, were now stained with oil, and she loved it. But by late afternoon, a black SUV appeared at the gate. Clayton's body stiffened. Delaney stood up slowly. She recognized the driver. Jason. He stepped out with practiced calm, dressed like he was entering a courtroom instead of a hangar. "Miss Carter, I am relieved to see you are well." "Jason," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "What brings you here?" "You have the world panicking. Your sanitized jet missed its departure. The media is spiraling. I'm here to escort you back to your reality." She smiled politely. "You mean your version of it?" Jason's eyes flicked to Clayton. Who is he? Clayton stepped forward, unfazed. Just the guy who kept her jet from blowing up. Jason gave a tight, insincere laugh. Right. And now you think that qualifies you to stand next to her? Delaney's voice dropped, calm but sharp. I don't need qualifications to choose who I stand next to. Jason tried to regain ground. There are investors watching, Delaney. There are appearances to keep. You're a Carter. No, she said, walking toward him slowly. I am Delaney, and for the first time, I am going to live like it. Jason opened his mouth and closed it again. Delaney turned to Clayton. Come with me. Where to? To show the world I am not ashamed of the one person who saw me before the brand. Clayton hesitated, then nodded once. She reached for his hand, and this time, Clayton took it. The doors of the hangar opened wide. The cameras outside clicked like firecrackers, but Delaney Carter walked forward, oil-stained hands interlocked with the mechanics, wearing no makeup, no diamonds, just truth, and the world held its breath. As they stepped out into the bright glare of the afternoon sun, the world outside the hangar seemed like an entirely different realm. Reporters rushed forward, snapping photos and yelling questions, but Delaney did not flinch. She did not care about their words or their judgment. The only thing that mattered now was the man standing beside her. The man who had seen her for who she truly was. Not the legacy, not the billions, but the person hiding beneath it all. Jason was already in his car, watching from a distance. His face was a mix of disbelief and frustration, his fingers tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. He had never seen Delaney this way, never seen her so unafraid to live on her own terms. The years of carefully crafted personas, of board meetings and investment reports, all of it had crumbled in an instant. Delaney, this is reckless, Jason had warned her earlier when they spoke on the phone. You can't just throw everything away for some mechanic. What about your future, your legacy? Delaney didn't respond to his frantic messages. She knew what he would say. She knew how much he feared her breaking free. The empire they had built together was at risk, but she had come to a realization that would change everything. She had spent her entire life building a future she never wanted. It was time to stop pretending. Clayton stood beside her, his hands still stained with engine grease. He wasn't rich. He didn't have connections. He didn't even own a car that could turn heads. But in that moment, Delaney realized that none of those things mattered. What mattered was that Clayton had always been real. He had never wanted her for her name or her wealth. He simply wanted her. As they walked toward the waiting aircraft, Delaney's heart raced, not from the media frenzy around them, but from the strange peace that had settled over her. She had never felt more alive than she did in that moment. For the first time, she was making a choice for herself, not for the expectations of others. Are you sure about this? Clayton asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as they approached the jet. She smiled, a soft but genuine smile. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. The jet was gleaming under the sunlight, the world outside continuing its chaotic frenzy. But Delaney didn't care about the world anymore. She only cared about what happened next, about taking the steps that would shape the rest of her life. They boarded the jet, and the doors closed behind them with a heavy finality. The world outside, the investors, the media, the expectations, they would have to wait. For the first time, Delaney was choosing what came next for her. She wasn't bound by the title that had been placed on her from birth. She was free. As the jet soared into the sky, leaving the hangar and her old life far behind, Delaney looked over at Clayton. His face was calm, but there was a warmth in his eyes, a quiet understanding that she had been searching for her whole life. Where to? The pilot asked, his voice crackling through the intercom. Delaney thought for a moment. Wherever life takes us, she said, her voice steady and filled with a newfound sense of freedom. Clayton's eyes met hers, and in that glance, they both understood. This was not just a new chapter. This was a new beginning. And it was just the beginning of the greatest adventure either of them could ever have imagined. The horizon stretched out before them, vast and limitless, just like the future. And Delaney knew, as the jet continued its ascent into the sky, that she had made the right choice. The world might never understand why she did it, but for the first time, she didn't need their approval. She had found something far more valuable: her own happiness.